Agency on Bay Management meeting today. We have a wonderful agenda. Is there a question here before we say anything else? Okay. Alana, if you would, is there anything else that you need to share before we get into the other parts of the meeting?
No, the last thing I would really like for everyone to do is also the way I'm going to be taking attendance. If you could drop your name and organization in the chat as well. So open the chat through the bottom icon, you'll see chat, and then just add your name and organization there. And then I'll be able to look back at the recording and just record who is here.
Also, my name is Joan McGowan. I'm standing in for David Worth from the city of St. Petersburg, but I am not able to video Zoom this morning.
Okay.
Thanks, Joan.
There are a couple of people here that aren't videoing with us, but all right. Do we have any public comment before we get into the meeting or announcements? All right, then the fourth point on our agenda is approval of our December 10th meeting, our agency meeting summary. Do I have a motion for approval? I'm listening. Does somebody want to give a motion to approve the agenda?
This is Maya Burke. I'll move approval.
I'll second that. Mark Luther.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone in objection? If not, then we'll move on. What we're going to do today is very important, not just for today, but for all our future meetings. Alana took it on herself to really try to get all of the information related to how we operate, what the procedures have been in the past, why ABM is important, the kinds of things that we have been successful in initiating and having happen in our region. And I'm going to ask Alana if she wouldn't mind going ahead and sharing with us some of the concepts and ideas that we're going to be discussing with you today before we get into our presentations. Because as we begin to really reinvigorate the ABM, we want to encourage participation from all of the agencies that are part of the ABM program. So Alana, if you would, I'd appreciate your taking it at this point.
Sure. Does everyone see the full screen? Okay, great. Great. Well, hi, everyone. I think I've met most of you, but if not, my name is Alana Todd. I am the relatively new environmental planner for the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, and I will be taking over as the staff support for the Agency on Bay Management. Like our chair already said, I will be going through some of the operating procedures that we have, our membership, and then we'll be working on prioritizing some of the activities for ABM moving forward as we're in our CCMP. Before I launch into the presentation, if everyone could just mute their microphones, that'll be great, just so we're not hearing any background noise. Okay. So first off, I just wanted to show everyone how to navigate the ABM website so you can find meeting materials in the schedule in between meetings, and then the summaries as well. So if you just go to tbrpc.org/ABM, this is what our page looks like, and you can see I have highlighted here on the left the tab for the meeting schedule and materials. And if you click that, you'll see all of the full agency meetings for the rest of the year. And then if you scroll down, you'll be able to find the meeting presentations and the agenda and summaries for each of the meetings. And that goes back, I think, at least a few years. And then if you want some more information on the subcommittees, you can click on this tab and it has those listed. And then if you ever want to reach me, my email is pretty easy. It's just alana@tbrpc.org, but it's here on this webpage as well. And my number is too. So keep moving on. So I thought it would be good to preface first with a little bit of history of ABM. And I know many of you have been on ABM for a very long time. I've talked to some of you and you've been here since its foundation in 1985. So some of this is definitely not new to you, but we do have some new members. And so I thought we would start off with just a little bit of background. And so beginning in 1985, TBRPC convened the region to develop the Future of Tampa Bay report, and that included specific actions to reduce pollution and then recover habitats in Tampa Bay. And the Agency on Bay Management was established to support the report's recommendations. And then some significant accomplishments of ABM in the past have been establishing the Surface Water Improvement and Management Program. ABM is also responsible for establishing the Sarasota Bay and then the Tampa Bay as the national estuary programs. It also established the Bay Soundings publication, which is still running today. And then more recently, one of the most recent actions that they did was to help protect seagrasses by providing some recommendations to Pinellas County, and they established an ordinance to limit horse activity in the Bay. And so I would welcome longtime members to add comments in the chat function with any other significant accomplishments of ABM. I know a lot of you have talked to me on the phone and you have, all of the different accomplishments ABM has done in the past. And so that will help to inform some of our new members if you care to share what those are. And I pulled these directly out of our operating procedures. So the Abm mission, or the primary statement of what ABM does, is serving as an advocate for the Tampa Bay ecosystem, promoting its restoration and protection through responsible resource-based management, providing a forum for open discussion of issues affecting the ecosystem, and educating and encouraging the public to participate in bay protection and management, and then fostering wise use by commercial and recreational interests. And so I've talked to some of you and generally what I've heard is that ABM is the voice of the bay in quotes. And so ABM stands as the foremost, at least for TBRPC and for our region, of advocating for its protection and providing a voice in a forum for discussing the different issues and projects that are going on that might impact Tampa Bay. And so I pulled out some of the duties that I thought all of us should be aware of. There's some background noise. If everyone wouldn't mind just muting yourself, that would be great. So we're not hearing any background noise. Thank you. So from our operating procedures, the agency is defined as meeting quarterly. So we have about 40 meetings, full agency meetings every year. And then as we get our subcommittees back up and running, we'll have subcommittee meetings as well in between the full agency meetings. And then the agency is also defined as cooperating with and securing the cooperation of municipal, county, and other local agencies and relevant department agencies or state and federal governments in implementing the comprehensive conservation and management plan for Tampa Bay and other relevant management plans. And we'll be going into the activities that were assigned to ABM and the CCMP later on in the presentation. And then the agency shall encourage the coordination of existing regulatory programs and studies of all federal, state, regional, and local agencies involved in the management of Tampa Bay. And then the agency will serve as a liaison between the TBRPC and all of the environmental agencies, organizations, and interest groups that are members on the ABM. Some of our other duties outlined in our operating procedures will develop a regional environmental resources library and information system within the council, and then also establishing and annually preparing a summary of agency and members' activities for publications in our Bay Soundings Environmental Journal and other appropriate outlets. And then we'll also aspire to sponsor or co-sponsor regional environmental conferences annually, emphasizing growth management and natural resource issues in the Tampa Bay watershed. And so about our membership, I pulled out this top one because I think it will help in making sure that we keep regular membership, and people are coming to each of the full agency meetings. And so it outlines in our operating procedures that agency members shall make reasonable good faith efforts to personally attend the regular quarterly meetings, and then failure to attend 4 consecutive meetings shall disqualify the member from further participation unless those privileges are restored by the chair. And so we're going to start trying to keep attendance more regularly, and I'll reach out to people if you're not showing, and then we'll just make sure that a representative is coming to each meeting from all of the different organizations that are supposed to be represented on ABM. And then each member will be responsible for registering his or her attendance by initialing an alphabetical roster to be dated and kept as part of the membership attendance record. And so I added here that for the sake of virtual meetings, please put your full name and organization into the chat feature of Zoom. And I know I already recommended most of you do that, but if you recently joined us, then please make sure that you're adding your full name and organization to the chat feature, and that's how I'll take attendance for this meeting. And then the next point is that members may discharge their duties through alternates who have been granted such power in writing. So I've already reached out to most of you about filling out a member form, and there you've identified an alternate member to serve in your place if you aren't able to attend. And so that's what I'm going to take is you've put it in writing, and should you or your alternate not be able to attend a meeting, then please just send me an email saying who your alternate will be, and then I'll make sure that they're counted in the roster. And then this last point I think is really important, that non-member attendees may participate in discussions. Members may also request that the chair solicit comment from non-member attendees on specific proposals. Such requests may be granted at the sole discretion of the chair. So just because you're not an official voting member, you can still participate in the discussion, and we can still hear your opinion, and you can weigh in on these really important issues. We'd have a lot of member organizations, more than 60. And so we can't open up membership to every single, affiliate organization of those. We have to choose, one representative to represent each broad organization. And so you're still welcome to have as many people as you'd like to attend, and they're still welcome to speak. They might not be official voting members. And so we would still encourage everyone to weigh in on the different issues. And so I wanted to go through the membership roster that I was able to find, and I've been trying to identify who the representative is from each organization. And I thought I would show you those, and we can go through each organization. And if you do find, if you do know a contact or the recent representative from the organization that I can reach out to, then please let me know in the chat function of your Zoom window. And so I'm going to go through the people that I have all their information and they've turned in the form, and then I'll go through those that have not turned in their form, and those are highlighted in yellow. And then the ones in red, I don't have a representative that I've reached out to at all yet. And so if you know someone there, then please let me know. So for the Friends of the Hillsborough River, I have John and Rich that are representing that group. And then from the Tampa Bay Conservancy, I have Sally Thompson and Dan Sabercool as her alternate. Tampa Bay Watch, I have Sarah Herndon and then Melanie Grion. And I'm sorry, I might butcher some of your guys' last names because I've only been corresponding with you through email. And so if I say your first or last name wrong, I really apologize. And then from the Wood Consulting, Environmental Consulting Group, which is through the representing one of the commercial interests, I have Kevin Shelton, and then Terry Fluke is representing the Tampa Bay Pilots Association, and Amy Butler is representing Tampa Electric Company, TECO. And so I have a few of you that I've identified a person, and then I've sent you the form, the member form to fill out, and I just need you to send those back to me so I can keep them on file. So we're never really questioning, who's a member from here on out. So Mark Rochelle will be representing the Audubon, Florida, and then Nancy Stevens will be representing the Sierra Club, and then Sean, and I do not know how to say your last name, is it Ducher, will be representing the Gulfstream Natural Gas or Williams. And so for the three of you, if you could just turn in the form, that would be great. And then I don't have anyone from the Florida Senate, Florida House of Representatives, the Florida Aquarium, someone to represent commercial fishing, and then environmental law, Duke Energy. I've reached out to David Bruzak, but I didn't get a response. And then Florida Power and Light, and then the Mosaic Company. So again, if you know someone from those that I can reach out to, please put their name and email, if you have it, in the chat. And then the next list, so representing the science academic interests, I have Libby Carnahan and her alternate Angela Collins representing the IFAS and Sea Grant. And then representing USF, I have Mark Luther and his alternate Stephen Myers. And then for recreational interest, I have Richard Sanchez, who's representing the Egmont Key Alliance. And then for our county representatives, I have Commissioner Stacy White and his aide Megan Nixon, who's this alternate for Hillsborough. We have an elected and staff for each county. And then for the staff for Hillsborough, I have David Glicksberg and his alternate is Ryan Riordan. And then for Manatee staff, I have Rob Brown and his alternate is Greg Blanchard. And then for Pinellas staff, I have Melanie Weed, and then Stacy Day is her alternate. And then for the Port Authorities, for Port Tampa Bay, I have Christopher Cooley and his alternate Jackie Julian. And then for Port of St. Petersburg, I have David Worth and then his alternate Joan McGowan. And then for the Manatee Port Authority, I have George Eiseminger, but I need his form to be submitted. And then Pinellas the elected official for Pinellas is still to be determined. I've reached out to them and they're finding someone. And then I don't have anyone for Hillsborough Community College, for Eckerd College, someone to represent recreational fishing, an elected official from Manatee, and then an elected and a staff representative from Pasco. Okay, and then for representing the Hillsborough County City County Planning Commission, I have Sean College, and then his alternate is Diego Guerra. And then I have Ed Sherwood and his alternate Maya Burke representing the Tampa Bay Estuary Program. For Tampa Bay Water, I have Warren Hogg and his alternate is Robert McConnell. For U.S. Geological Service, I have Kevin Grimsley. And then for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Research Institute, I have Brad Furman and his alternate is Caroline Gorga. And then for the Florida Department of Transportation, I have Allison Connor and Robin Rhines. And then I need a form from Tom Ash, who's representing the Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County. And then I also need a form from Aubrey Hershuren, who's representing the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And then I need the form from Chris Anastasio from the Southwest Florida Water Management District. And then I don't have anyone from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I haven't heard a response from Navin Griffin, who I reached out to from the U.S. Coast Guard. I haven't heard a response from Jason Kirkpatrick, who I've reached out to from MacDill Air Force Base. So if those aren't the right people to reach out to, if there's been a more updated person, then please let me know. And the same thing with NOAA. And then I don't have anyone from the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, and then the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission.
Hold on, okay.
The last page.
Yeah,
Libby.
This is through all this work to pull everyone together, and I think most of us definitely see a few contacts that we know that haven't replied, and I'm just happy not to be on this naughty list, but we'll help you.
Yeah, well, if I put no response next to them, it's not that they're on a naughty list. It's just, are they the right person, that the most recent representatives? Because I've scraped together people from different lists over the years. And so I'm not even sure if that's the right person who was the last representative. So if you see that there's no response, perhaps they're not the right person. And so if you could just correct me, if you know anyone, then please just add them in the chat and I'll go back and I'll see who you added and then I can reach out to them. Okay, and then this is the last little bit. So From Tampa, I have Heather Maggio. And then from St. Petersburg, I have Melinda Spall, and I just need a form from her. Our chair, Barbara Todd. We have a vice chair, Woody Brown. They're both from TBRPC. And then representing Pinellas, I have George Henderson. And then the ones I need forms from, I already said Melinda Spall and then Sarah Kessler. And then from Gulfport, Mayor Henderson, I saw was on one list, but I haven't heard back from him. So is he the representative from Gulfport? And then I don't have anyone at-large members from Pasco, Manatee, and Hillsborough. So if you know any of the previous members or representatives from these organizations, then let me know. And then I'll also open up, are there organizations that are missing? I know we already have a lot of organizations that are a part of ABM, but if there's any that should be on this list that isn't, then, you know, I welcome you to offer those suggestions.
Thank you, Alana. And this is not a naughty list.
Yeah.
Somebody suggested. What Alana's trying to do is make sure that we get this organization performing at its fullest potential. And just by, frankly, looking at the members that were included in the original formation, it's an impressive group. And you will have a lot that you can accomplish, that we can accomplish, if we can get all of these positions filled and keep our communication open and really get to work on some of the challenges that we face in the Tampa Bay area. So y'all look at this, and if you can make any recommendations to Alana, I know she'd appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, are you finished with this part, Alana, or is there something else?
There's just a few more, and then we're going to hop into the prioritization. So the next slide, I just wanted to give a quick overview of the subcommittees that we have. And I know in the past year, our subcommittees haven't been very active, but we hope to change that. And so we have 4 subcommittees, but we're looking to just bring back 2 for right now, get those very active, and then we'll bring back the other 2. And so the 2, and you'll see these in the forms that I sent out to all of the members for you to identify which one you'd like to be a part of. The first is the Natural Resources and Environmental Impact Review, and they're primarily reviewing significant developments and other projects involving Tampa Bay for environmental impacts, and they preparing formal comments to TBRPC to appropriate permitting agencies regarding mitigation and restorative measures, and then also monitoring and evaluating long-term or broader issues that affect the proper management of Tampa Bay through some proactive planning. And then we have our legislative review subcommittee, and that's monitoring pertinent state and federal legislation as it relates to Tampa Bay management issues, and drafts new Bay management legislation for approval by the agency and TDRPC, and sponsorship by key legislative leaders. And then the 2 subcommittees that are not active right now, and we hope to get them active in the future once we build up momentum with the others. These are the Habitat Restoration Subcommittee and then the Public Information Subcommittee. And so the Habitat Restoration Subcommittee discusses and develops approaches to restoring and improving habitat within the Tampa Bay estuary. And then the Public Information Subcommittee develops innovative and effective ways for disseminating information of Tampa Bay management issues to the general public. Specific tasks are to include the organization of a regional environmental conference. And so we think we'll be getting that one back up and running in 2022. Okay. And now that we've covered all of those, in order for us to get those subcommittees back up and running and for us to start kind of tackling these bigger issues, and according to one of our duties in our operating procedures is to start addressing some of the activities that have been assigned to us in a CCMP. And so this is the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan for Tampa Bay. And it's a community blueprint for action to sustain progress in protecting and restoring the Bay over a 10-year horizon. So from its most recent version in 2017 to 2027. Thus, a major revision occurs every 10 years, and then minor updates happen every 3 to 5 years to reflect our evolving knowledge and then understanding of Bay processes and community needs. And so there are 39 actions in the 2017 CCMP update. Each of the action represents specific activities to meet agreed upon objectives. And then responsible parties, implementation timelines, results, and deliverables are part of every action. And then actions were, just so you know how these were developed, they were developed with quarterly reviews from several committees, one of which was Agency on Bay Management. So a lot of these activities will not be new to many of you. And then final adoption of the individual actions, as well as the entire CCMP, came from the policy board, and which was composed of the elected and appointed officials and high-level environmental administrators from our estuary program, or from the partner governments. And so the policy board from the estuary program. And then so together right now, we're going to review the 14 specific activities within those actions that ABM is designated as a responsible party for. And Maya Burke, the assistant director at the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, and I organized the activities into 3 groups. Those that pertain to the full agency, those that pertain to the Legislative Review Subcommittee, and then the Natural Resources Environmental Impact Review Subcommittee. So we will review the activities for the full agency first, and then we will prioritize them using this Mentimeter software, and then we will move on to the subcommittees and do the same procedures for each of those. And then for each activity, I'm going to tell you the action, and then the objectives related to that action to provide some context for the activity, and then I'll read you the activity. So there's the actions, and then the activities are within that action. And so I'll give you some context by reading that action first, and then I'll tell you what I'll read the activity that we have on the slide. And then we'll move into the prioritization, and we'll give you directions on how to do that. And Maya is going to step in and help me there. So first, the first few activities, and these are for the full agency. So the first activity comes from the Bay Habitats Action 9, which is to enhance ecosystem values of tidal tributaries, which includes developing indicators and continual monitoring tributary health and function, and also improving public awareness of the value and benefits of healthy tidal tributaries. And so more specifically with activity 3, which includes ABM as a responsible party, it's to improve coordination among agencies and organizations involved in flood control, habitat protection, and water quality improvements to facilitate tidal tributaries restoration that supports comprehensive management goals. And then the next activity comes from the Spill Prevention and Response Action 2, which is to evaluate and update oil and hazardous material spill response plans for priority areas. Some of the objectives of this action include monitoring implementation of the oil and hazardous material spill response plans, encouraging greater participation of Bay Area environmental community in the review of area contingency plan, and then improving communication between stakeholders regarding planning and response for spills. So activity 3 specifically is to increase engagement between the USCG, the US Coast Guard, and spill responders and the environmental community, and encourage regular participation in the Agency on Bay Management by the USCG. And then piggybacking off of this activity is activity 1, which I don't have here, but it relates, which is to continue to update the area contingency plan. And since that the area contingency plan is currently under review, it could be shared within ABM as an opportunity to comment, which would help support activity 3 that we have here. And then the next activity comes from the Public Access Action 1, which is to provide for and manage recreational uses of the Bay. And the objectives of this action are to provide adequate and appropriate public access to the Bay and support responsible recreational use and enjoyment of the Bay. And so the specific activity that ABM can help with is activity 3. And this is to support education, outreach, and enforcement, and to reduce user conflicts among competing uses. So for example, kayakers versus boaters versus personal watercraft enthusiasts and others. And then the last activity comes from Public Education and Involvement Action 2. And this that action is to promote public education about key issues affecting the Bay. And that includes educating citizens about key problems facing the Bay and how they can participate in solutions. But more specifically, activity 2 is to continue to deliver targeted messages via diverse methods to diverse audiences by incorporating evolving communication tools, to reach people more effectively, and then coordinate and share lessons learned and new technologies through a regional education group. And so now that I've gone over the different activities that were assigned to ABM and the CCNP, we are going to step over to this menti.com, and then you enter this code 3211392, and we're going to prioritize them. And you'll see that they're listed shortened versions of the activities that are here. But Maya, I'd welcome you to unmute yourself if you want to help me explain how to do this. And also, can you drop the link for menti.com into the chat so people can click it?
Yep, good news, Alana. I already dropped the link in the chat, and people have they've started to rank as you were talking through things. But if
awesome.
You haven't, which is great. That'll make everything go really smoothly. So I think there's like a little bit more conversation now, but let's see.
I can't see the chat. So
okay,
are there any questions?
There's no questions. I just dropped the link in there again in case you need it, and we've already got some answers coming in. While you're thinking about what's important, I just thought I'd offer a couple examples of ways that the ABM is already, making progress on some of these fronts. For example, that first one about tidal tributaries, the thing that comes to mind for me is that great presentation at the last meeting on urban stream restoration techniques. I think that's a pretty important sort of capacity building or knowledge sharing presentation that's advancing that sort of goal. And I think more work that you all are doing applying those kinds of principles would be really helpful and appropriate for ABM to address. I think Alana did a good job reminding everybody that the area contingency plan is actually being updated right now, and it's available for review. I'll drop the link in the chat after we go through this voting procedure. But we've kind of talked about how important spill protection is to protecting and maintaining a healthy Tampa Bay, and this is one of the most important ways that we stay prepared. And so for members of the Agency on Bay Management to periodically be more involved sort of outside of our normal realm of comfort over there with the Coast Guard and spill protection folks, I think is important. I know that they would appreciate our help. And there are sometimes some needed resources, particularly for assessing environmental conditions to know what to protect, what's most vulnerable to a spill. And so that's something that might be appropriate for us to help out with. I think Alana highlighted some of the work that the agency was instrumental in addressing some of the competing uses that were going on the Skyway with equestrians, kiteboarders, beachgoers, and others. And I think that by having a variety of representatives of different user groups participating as members in the Agency of Bay Management, it's a very logical place for us to do some conflict resolution and some real talk about the few places where this might be an issue within the Bay. It's a pretty natural forum for that sort of thing. And then, yeah, I do hope to see that public information subcommittee sort of get back up and around to help with some of the communication needs throughout the region. We've got about a third of you all having ranked right now. I'm not sure if some folks are still working or if you're not able to maybe operate multiple screens given your different setup. But what we can do is I can, after this meeting, I can leave this, I can create a new version of this poll that's set at your own pace. So you can provide, for those who weren't able to provide feedback now, you can offer it, we'll maybe leave it open for about a week, and then we'll compile those results. But what we're kind of seeing, I'm not sure if y'all can see the results live. I know that I'm not sharing my screen, but it seems like there's a lot of consensus and interest in this idea of building capacity to address tidal tributaries for multiple benefits. That's really the top ranked thing in this category. Again, then next, this idea about addressing user conflicts and being a forum for that. Followed by sharing lessons learned and science communication. And then finally, the sort of lowest ranked one right now is that increasing that coordination between spill responders and the Coast Guard.
Chris, I see you have your hand up. Do you have a question?
Yeah, can we go back to the slide that had kind of the overall mission of the ABM?
Sure. You talking about this one?
Yes, that's it. Thanks.
And Alana, can you provide this presentation on the website so we can
Yes.
download it?
Yes.
Great, great.
I will do that. Do you need me to do that right now or after?
After, I can't do
Okay.
multiple, I can do 2 screens, but I can't do 3, so.
Okay, yeah. And I realize the operating procedures aren't on the website right now, but I will add those there as well. And we might want to look at updating those at the next meeting. The operating procedures were last revised in 2011, so it's probably time to revise them. And so I would recommend at the next meeting that that's something we take on.
I personally appreciate, Maya, you're working with Alana, and the fact that there's a real interest in getting this ABM going. It's very impressive what you've put together, Alana. What is our next step?
Okay, I'm going to go back to the activities. Is anyone else having like trouble or I think probably at this point we should just move on to the next one.
Yeah, that's what I'd suggest.
Yeah, okay.
2 more polls to work through.
Yeah, okay. So we are going to move on to the activities for the Legislative Review Subcommittee. And so the first activity comes from the Water and Sediment Quality Wastewater 2 action to extend central sewer service to priority areas now served by septic systems. And some of the objectives for those include like identifying and prioritizing hotspots of nutrient and bacteria contamination, converting to central sewers as opportunities arise, developing nitrogen loading estimates for septic systems in the Tampa Bay area, supporting adoption of new septic system, nitrogen reduction technology, and requirements for regular maintenance and inspection. And you can see that first activity 4 highlights that specific objective. And so the activity 4, which ABM is a responsible party for, is to support evaluation and adoption of new nitrogen reducing septic system technology locally, and supporting legislation at local, state, or federal levels to require regular maintenance and inspection of septic systems, support Florida Department of Health efforts to allow stricter septic system setbacks and standards in areas with impaired waters.
And I'll just jump in, 'cause maybe I think a lot of people are filling it out, so maybe if we just talk about them rather than doubling up. This is one that maybe hasn't got as much attention in our region, and I think that might be a mistake. We definitely have, like, people don't, I think because we're so urbanized, many folks don't understand the number of sort of septic systems that we still have in place. There are some pretty important things going on in certainly in Pinellas and Hillsborough counties to begin to try and address these issues. But they're complex, they're expensive, there's a lot of challenges, and I think that we could do a better job sharing some of the work that's been going on to address the aging septic systems that are within our watershed and contributing nutrient pollution to our bay.
Yeah, perhaps that could be a follow-up activity so that we have a better handle on what's actually going on and where we want to be and how we can get there.
There you go.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Maya, for that background. And so I'll just review the next activity, which comes from the Water and Sediment Qualities Contaminants of Concern Action 4. And that's to identify and understand emerging contaminants. And so the ABM is only responsible party for activity 4, which is to support legislation to reduce manufacture and use of household and personal care products containing toxic chemicals of concern and microplastics, support legislation to require additional water or wastewater treatment to remove chemicals that pose a documented human or ecological threat. Maya, do you have anything you want to add to that one?
We were crafting this action together jointly at the time when the U.S. Congress was addressing some of the issues associated with microbeads and personal care products. There have been a number of other issues that have come before the state legislature, thinking with respect to sunscreens and some of the potential effects those might have on sensitive corals or other aquatic habitats, and wildlife for that matter. We're doing, we've had a number of our local governments begin to raise questions about concerns about PFAS with respect to drinking water or other surface water bodies. So I think this is one where we don't necessarily know what the full scope of the hazard is for the watershed, but should we have strong scientific evidence that there is a problem within the watershed, I think the idea is that this would be a topic that would be appropriate for the ABM, to weigh in on to help us address.
Good.
Great. And then the next activity comes from the Fish and Wildlife Action 1, which is to increase on-water enforcement of environmental regulations. And so activity 6 for that action is to form a task force of interested bay managers, bay users, and others within ABM to develop and implement a strategy to achieve enhanced funding for on-water enforcement. And it says that our Legislative Affairs Committee, or I think it probably meant to say Legislative Review Subcommittee, could serve as a nucleus for a regional group.
And this is one I think everyone acknowledges would be a heavy lift, but we do know that this is an issue. Particularly, it's one that came up in some of the discussions surrounding Outback Key and Shell Key and the management of those resources, which are important both for nesting shorebirds as well as their desirable recreation areas. And some of those, there were a number of public meetings where there was quite a bit of discussion about the lack of law enforcement, on-water law enforcement available to help sort of mediate the differing needs of those folks and the birds in particular. So I think this is something that we've known as an issue, and it would be a challenge, but it's something that's probably important and worth the effort if ABM was interested. I think you have a lot of the players assembled here already.
Great. And then the last activity comes from the Spill Prevention and Response Action 1, which is to continue implementation of advanced technology to improve coordination of ship movements in Tampa Bay. And then ABM is identified as a party for advocacy and support for funding for activity 1, which I have here, and that's to continue to track and support permanent funding and enhancement of ports through local, state, federal, or private funding sources. And ports is the physical oceanographic real-time system. And then ABM is similarly listed as providing advocacy and support for funding for activity 2, which is to continue to monitor implementation of cooperative vessel traffic service.
So this is an example of, sort of an environmental disaster that occurred in the 1990s and some of the response that we came together as a region to deal with so that we didn't experience these problems again. And it's really, I think, a testament to the local commitment to protecting and restoring Tampa Bay. But at the same time, by standing up some of these local data sources that really help ship traffic navigate environmental conditions safely, what we've done is sort of put ourselves on the hook to continue to sustain these operations, whereas other places that maybe weren't as proactive have an easier time securing more stable funding streams to support these kinds of activities. And this is one I think that happens quietly in the background. And so it's important to keep top of mind for everyone that these funding streams to support these two activities are not always secure. And if we don't have this information, our bay is at risk, at more risk, greater risk for potential, spills due to navigational hazards or things like that. So I don't think this is like necessarily a core ABM thing, but to understand when there's a funding need and to be a voice for support. And I'm sure Mark can weigh in.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? This is Sally Thompson. Are we only looking at things that are in the CCMP? Because one of the things that the Legislative Review Committee was very involved with was the water and land amendment and full funding for whether it's swim or whether it's land programs or whatever. And I don't see anything about that in this.
You're right.
Yeah, right. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maya.
Now you go.
Oh, well, right now, yeah, we're just looking at the activities in the CCMP. I think some of those other legislation can support some of these activities. These are just giving us a jumping point for us to start addressing the things that have been assigned to us. But I would, we can definitely work on some of those other activities that we've worked on in the past as well, in my opinion. But Maya, do you have something to add?
No, I was going to say that's exactly right. This was using the CCMP as a lens, but I think the new Habitat Master Plan and the long history of ABM, definitely has made clear that land acquisition is critical for environmental protection. And if this agency wants to keep supporting that, I think that's a great idea.
You might want to look at the Future of Tampa Bay document that we put back together.
Yeah.
We had 40 priorities, and that was the impetus for ABM before the estuary program even existed.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how many, if you have a copy of it or if you've seen it or reviewed it, but anyway.
Okay.
If you don't have a copy, I've got a copy somewhere. I'm sure other people do too. So
Yeah.
Well, Sally, if you could make that information available to Alana, I'm sure she'd appreciate it. The idea of all this is to sort of summarize what we've been directed to do, but that's going to be the whole purpose of the legislative committee, is to go through these things and take in the prioritization that this entire group has and assimilate it so that we can have further discussion and action as we all determine is appropriate. I saw that Mr. Luther's hand was up. Did you have a question for Alana?
The only thing I would add to what Maya just said about Tampa Bay Ports is that it's the 30th anniversary of Tampa Bay Ports. We were the first in the nation, probably the first in the world. There are now, I think, 37 around the country, but we were the first, and I think we're still the best.
Well, amen to that one. Alana, do you have anything else to present on this?
We have one more set to prioritize for the last subcommittee.
We've only got 17 responses in. We were getting almost 30 before. So if you guys can make your final rankings real quickly here, and then I'll move on.
Okay, Alana.
Just give a few more seconds.
Well, you can move on, and I'll advance it once we get more responses come in. How's that?
Okay, sure. So I'll just start going over the next ones then. So this first activity comes from the Bay Habitats Action 2, which is to establish and implement mitigation criteria and objectives, of which includes support progress toward habitat restoration goals by implementing mitigation criteria specific to the Tampa Bay watersheds. And then, there's other objectives like identifying priority sites for mitigation banks, and collaborating with the private sector to evaluate and improve mitigation, establishing long-term monitoring of mitigation sites across multiple habitats. But the ABM is the lead for activity 4 for that action. And that is to host a workshop with local environmental managers and mitigation bankers to explore locations and opportunities for mitigation banks and or regional offsite mitigation areas, especially in areas with wetland deficits and impaired waters. Anything you want to add to that, Maya?
Just that mitigation bankers, I think, were more involved in the ABM probably in the early mid 2000s, and the involvement has been sort of periodic ever since, and there's probably a need for some regional coordination of those efforts.
Okay, Mark, your hand is up again?
No, I think he just needs to lower it.
Oh, okay.
I needed to lower it.
Well, congratulations again, by the way. We're proud of you.
All right, and then the
Alana?
next activity comes from the Fish and Wildlife Action number 1 to increase on-water enforcement of environmental regulations. And then this activity number 2, which ABM is one of the responsible parties for, is to offer half-day continuing education workshops open to all marine enforcement personnel to share information about the status and ecology of key resources among scientists, bay managers, and enforcement agencies. And then sessions should focus on specific resource protection needs and associated regulations.
So this
Alana?
Yeah.
Sorry, oh wait, go ahead. Maya.
This kind of activity was done largely in conjunction with the Manatee Awareness Coalition, which is facilitated by the Estuary Program, with a lot of help and frequent participation from Audubon, who also convene these kind of law enforcement workshops. Typically, these would occur when there were some different changes to things like the slow speed zone, the no wake zone, slow speed zones associated with seagrass and manatee protection, that sort of thing. But I think it's been a number of years since we've had one.
If I could just add, Libby Carnahan with Florida Sea Grant, and my colleagues and I have been holding similar workshops, but generally based around fisheries regulations. And so we're currently working on one for this spring, but the audience is law enforcement officers. And then we have our colleagues, I believe in the Panhandle and on the East Coast, working on kind of to have workshops at the same time. So this is something we'd be very interested in partnering on with ABM, I think, and adding more, natural resource issues and so on.
Good. And I think that through some of the communication channels you're developing, Alana, we could be sharing this information periodically, even between our meetings, and perhaps with the workshops that you Lana, what else do you have to present?
Yeah, so we only have these 3 more activities to go over and prioritize, and then the presentation's done, we'll move on to the next one. But this is really important, again, because this will give us some activities to start working on in our subcommittees, rather than us just showing presentations. And we want it to be, more discussion based, and us to actually start working on some activities, because ABM has done really amazing accomplishments in the past. And I know we can start to work on these actions and do some more great accomplishments in the future. And so this next activity comes from the Bay Habitats Action 6, which encourages habitat enhancement along altered waterfront properties. And ABM is the lead for this activity 3, which is to explore regulatory rule revisions to address the current disincentive for replacing existing seawalls and expedite regulatory permitting for living shoreline projects, and then identify and address regulatory constraints arising from lack of recognition and adequate definition of living shorelines, and explore potential for mitigation credits for design alternatives to seawalls.
And I'll just say, I think a lot of progress has been made independent on this particular subject, with some different Army Corps permits that are now available that weren't before, and some attention from the local government partners in terms of their land development regulations. But it might be good to catch everybody up to speed on what's there and make sure that most of the barriers have been addressed.
Thank you. Alana?
And then the next activity is from the Fish and Wildlife Action 5, which is to continue and expand the critical fisheries monitoring program. And ABM is the lead party for activity 4, which is to improve and expand coordination for regional review of development and restoration projects that may impact federally designated essential fish habitat in Tampa Bay.
I still view this as one of the most important things that ABM has done in the past, and I hope it continues to do moving forward, as you all have, projects that will potentially have extra jurisdictional impacts. I hope that they can come through a body like the Agency on Bay Management, because we have folks like Mark Schrammick here who are reviewing a lot of these permits for essential fish habitat, and I'm sure it helps him to hear the regional sort of consensus and thoughts about these specific projects and how they might contribute to the overall health of the bay and the ecosystem in the watershed.
Thank you.
Great.
Is there one more, Ilana?
Yeah. Yes. So the last activity comes from the Water and Sediment Qualities Stormwater Runoff Action 10, and that's to expand the use of green infrastructure projects or green infrastructure practices. Sorry. And ABM is one of the responsible parties for action or activity 2, which is to develop and deliver information and tools needed to expand green infrastructure implementation within the watershed, such as professional training, compatibility reviews of government development codes and comprehensive plans, demonstration sites with educational signs and information, focused research and complete cost benefits associated with green infrastructure building and site design, and focused research on pollution reductions.
And I would just say, sharing again what the local governments are doing so that we can learn from each other. This would be a great forum for that kind of work. Pinellas County, has a low impact development manual. I believe that they've shared here, but Hillsborough County is undergoing an effort to rewrite and create a stormwater manual that sort of implements their One Water plan and will incorporate green infrastructure techniques. I don't know if any of them want to weigh in, but I know this is something that everyone's making progress on. And so the extent to which you can share on these different topics and learn from each other, I think would be beneficial for the ABM.
And this is also something that we are addressing somewhat in the stormwater management coordination and outreach committee that I help coordinate as well.
Yeah, and so maybe making sure that that can be a pipeline for conversations here too, so that because there's not like 100% overlap in those groups.
Yeah.
Okay. Ilana, do you have any further presentations on this?
Yeah, so if everyone, Maya, did you open up for people to?
It's open up. I got about 16 responses coming in, so I'd expect about 10 more, and I'll just leave it open for right now. And like I said, I'll create another version of this that you can send out, Ilana, so that folks that weren't able to weigh in now can do so over the next week, and then we can merge the results together and you can have an idea of what people are most interested in making progress on.
Great. And so if you weren't able to, do it now, then please make sure you click on that link. I'll probably send it in an email, following our meeting today. So that's all I have for you all. Thank you so much for helping us to prioritize those activities. Before we launch into the next presentation, are there any questions or comments that people have related to everything that I just presented?
Okay. Well, thank you for working together on this, and that history and experience, Maya, that you've had in the past is very helpful. I'm glad to see that cooperation, and I know that getting us more involved with our subcommittees is going to afford the opportunity for greater communication between all of you. Before you leave, I have a quick question, Ilana. Do you have any dates established yet for the meetings of any of these subcommittees?
I don't yet, but I'd like for everyone to submit their forms if they haven't gotten those to me, so I can help determine who's going to be on what committee. And then I'll continue to reach out to the other organizations that we need a representative for. And once we have those better sorted, and then I'll reach out about finding a time that works for everyone, and we can establish, a regular meeting time for both of the subcommittees. So please submit your form if you haven't, and then I'll reach out to the other organizations soon.
Thank you very much. We have two very important presentations today, and they're relevant from some of the things that Ilana has already presented to you as to some of the concerns that we have for Tampa Bay. The red tide is a problem that seems to never go away, doesn't go away, and it's something that we need to address. And sharing some information and updates with us today is Dr. Jennifer Shafer. She's a doctorate with the Science and the Environment Council. So Jennifer, if you would take the screen here at this point in time and present us your red tide response.
Jennifer, you have to unmute yourself.
Jennifer, we aren't hearing you.
There we go.
Okay, good.
Well, thanks, Barbara, and thanks, Alana, for the invitation to present today. I'm really excited to share this work. It's been a long time coming, but it's been very exciting for us. So let's start, at risk of triggering some PTSD amongst the participants here, let's recall the last red tide event. The severity, the extent, the duration, it was unprecedented in recent years, and in fact received national attention. 120 miles of coastline in Southwest Florida impacted for 16 months. The severe red tide conditions developed in Charlotte Harbor as early as November of 2017, and consistently high levels of red tide cells, defined by FWRI as 100,000 cells per liter or more, reached Sarasota County and Manatee County waters in July of 2018, and then Pinellas County waters in August of 2018. Concentrations rose to more than 1,000 times lethal levels for fish and stayed there for weeks on end. And the result was devastating. Fish kill reports were up 500%. In Sarasota Bay, where there's a network of passive acoustic monitors, those stations fell nearly silent of the sounds of fish and snapping shrimp in August. Manatee strandings were up 300%. There were 68 animals that died in our region. And overall, the West Coast, overall, 1 out of every 12 manatees living on the West Coast population died in 2018. Turtle strandings were up 300%, 190 animals. Bird hospital admissions up 300%, but most of them actually never made it to the hospital. To about 2,400 plus tons of dead marine life were cleaned from beaches and waterways, but it wasn't just the wildlife. Manatee County Barrier Island restaurants lost 25% of their revenue for the year. And 211 calls for social services reached a 3-year high in September 2018, especially for food and utilities. This was higher than the number of calls in September of 2017 when Hurricane Irma hit. Given these extreme conditions, the actions and sacrifices of the county and local partners, staffs were really remarkable. Dozens of staff across multiple departments and local jurisdictions worked long, strenuous hours beyond their regular duties. And managers worked collaboratively and creatively to adapt and implement new strategies to respond to the rapidly changing conditions. We talk a lot about heroes these days, but these heroes were largely unknown and underappreciated by the public. So this study is really in tribute to them. Our study summarizes the Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay regional response to the red tide event. It's intended to help identify opportunities to coordinate response efforts, to recognize successes, and to share lessons learned. It complements the regional red tide impact study described in Volume 1, which summarizes red tide impacts across 18 measures of community health. For this part of the study, we interviewed emergency response managers and natural resource managers from each of the 5 counties of the Tampa Bay and Sarasota Bay region, including Pasco, Pinellas, Hillsborough, Manatee, and Sarasota counties. We also gleaned information from county documents and media reports. And with that regional perspective, we are able to identify notable actions and innovations for the response, to see where there were gaps and challenges, and provide some recommendations for preparing and responding to future red tide. And like hurricanes, It's a hazard we hope won't return anytime soon, but we know it's coming. We took everything we learned, and honestly, most of it was from Kelly Hammer-Levy in Pinellas County, and we organized it into Red Tide Response Operations Plan. Then we customized one for each of the 5 counties. Sarasota County focused cleanup efforts on beaches and boat launches and removed 255 tons of red tide debris. In Manatee County and its island communities, 316 tons was cleaned from beaches, boat launches, and some inshore bays. Pinellas County's strategy was to detect, prioritize, and harvest floating debris before it impacted shorelines. 1,862 tons of red tide debris were cleaned from Pinellas County waters and beaches. Pasco and Hillsborough counties did not experience onshore impacts, but they were staged and ready to go. Hillsborough did clean lower Tampa Bay in order to keep fish out of the other bay segments. Counties were awarded FDEP grant funds to reimburse the costs of cleanup contractors, rental equipment, disposal fees, and overtime hours for regular employees. Reports indicate that Pinellas received $7.5 million in reimbursements, Manatee County $750,000, and Sarasota $1.5 million. In addition to cleanup, counties also increased their red tide sampling at beaches and offshore. Counties hosted weekly county-wide update calls for division managers and county partners. And once a week, all the counties and agencies working across the region shared an update call. Meanwhile, county communication departments and visitor bureaus cranked out public information on websites, social media, and via email and call centers. Now I want to highlight some of the success stories. Waste management was a major logistical aspect of the overall response. Staging and hauling dumpsters to the right place at the right time was critical. Pinellas County and Manatee County developed GIS-based dumpster management tools, new apps to monitor the location and fill status of dumpsters. Pinellas County also developed a GIS-based online red tide reporting tool for the public to communicate their observations of red tide conditions quickly and to track staff response to those observations. Pinellas County collaborated with federal partners to develop a HAB-scope experimental red tide respiratory forecast tool, providing respiratory irritation risk forecasts for beaches every 3 hours. And Pinellas County also utilized high-resolution satellite imagery for coastal areas in order to prepare for harvesting dead fish offshore or pre-staging beach cleaning equipment in anticipation of fish heading onshore. As I mentioned, managing these dumpsters full of putrid biohazardous waste was a big deal. And through trial and error, responders found that lining the dumpsters and depositing a layer of sand at the bottom, using biodegradable cherry bomb deodorizer, and securely tarping if the dumpsters were left overnight, all of that seemed to work best. But perhaps the single most important red tide response innovation was prioritizing cleanup of floating debris, tracking debris masses and removing them before they impacted shorelines or sunk to the bottom. Besides the obvious impacts to beaches and sensitive coastal marsh, dead fish left to decay in the water may contribute to a longer red tide bloom, more severe waterfowling that may be responsible for seagrass die-offs, and increased long-term nutrient loads in the bay. Pinellas County utilized a variety of vessels and manpower of local fishermen, charter captains, who themselves were recruited and hired as subcontractors by the county's debris removal contractor. Communications. Mote Marine Laboratory maintains an online beach conditions reporting system that provides daily eyes-on reports from trained monitors. In Sarasota County, lifeguards reported beach conditions, including dead fish and respiratory irritation, twice daily. This proved to be an important source of information for the public, at least in Sarasota and Manatee counties. But data from Moat's system was sparse in Pinellas County, so Pinellas County's Convention and Visitors Bureau set up their own beach report page and added the HabScope respiratory forecasts to help people target the best beach on any given day. Sarasota County Communications produced PSA videos showing the county's red tide response in action. And this was a pretty effective way to share the scope and complexity of the response, as well as put a face on it. So the next 6 slides, I want to highlight some of the gaps or challenges that we noticed and provide some of our recommendations for possible approaches. Now, these recommendations come from the authors. They are certainly up for discussion and exploration by managers, by the ABM itself. So we look forward to further discussion. So starting with authority. The governor's declaration of emergency finally came on August 13th, which was weeks after the impact started in the southern counties. The declaration was the trigger that counties needed to activate a private contractor for debris cleanup because it ensured availability of FDEP grant funds. And there's broad agreement that an earlier declaration of emergency would have resulted in a more robust, effective, and coordinated response. None of the 5 counties in the Tampa Bay and Sarasota region had a red tide emergency response plan prior to the incident. And it sounded like there was little institutional memory from the last major red tide event in 2005, 2006. So as a consequence, staff were tasked with creating and adapting procedures in real time, which is how the response was so remarkable. So we recommend developing a process with FDEP for determining what conditions warrant a red tide emergency declaration from the governor in order to activate an early and robust response. And in the early days, before the emergency declaration, we encourage exploring local tourist development tax revenue funds, which might be a way to fund emergency mobilization before the state emergency grants become available. And of course, develop and adopt countywide red tide response operations plans. Coordination. You know, other than sharing situation reports and the weekly update calls, counties didn't really have a formal process for coordinating response efforts between neighboring counties. Pinellas and Hillsborough and Manatee, all of the staff are very familiar with each other through the collaboration that happens through the estuary program and the ABM. So there was a lot of comparing notes going on, but nothing formal. And since red tide impacts moved northward up the coast and were spatially patchy, even in the affected areas, not all counties were responding to the same intensity at the same time. So we recommend developing a process or maybe an MOU for cooperation between neighboring counties for mobilizing Gulf and Bay surveillance, equipment, and subcontractors in shared water bodies. And perhaps develop a process or MOU for cooperation with FDEP state parks to share equipment. We're thinking about these skimmer boats that the parks use for harvesting invasive aquatic plants. Staffing. As you can imagine, staff were just exhausted and burnt out from working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week for 10 weeks straight or more. And the incident commanders and the operations chiefs, they worked even longer hours. And with all the new procedures being implemented, staff and volunteers required on-the-fly training. There were also shortages of licensed and trained drone operators and heavy equipment operators. And some counties had no system for tracking time and activities of staff and verifying time and activities of contractors. This is important because it's required for FDEP grant reimbursement. So we recommend recruiting civilian fishing guides, fishers, licensed drone operators, and Class C licensed commercial drivers to assist in the efforts, and to ensure that debris cleanup contracts cover subcontracting to civilian captains and fishermen to assist in the cleanup. We also recommend developing a centralized, systematic reporting tool and open database that are simple and fast to complete for staff logging their activities. Debris contractors. So most counties already had contracts in place for hurricane storm debris cleanup that could be activated for the red tide cleanup. However, some didn't include cleanup of hazardous biological materials, so that had to be worked out. Some counties struggled to hire civilian captains who wanted to assist with the cleanup because there was no established process or procedure. And some counties and contractors couldn't even get the manpower and equipment that they needed due to competition with other impacted areas. The equipment was already leased out. The manpower was already assigned to other areas. So we recommend ensuring that debris contractors' contracts cover Class 3 biological hazards and subcontracting civilian captains and fishermen to assist. We recommend limiting the number of counties in the same region that any given debris management company can contract with in order to avoid overextending. And we recommend encouraging county contractors to cooperate or subcontract with each other in adjacent areas. For example, Hillsborough contractors could help with efforts in Manatee or Pinellas. Conditions assessment. So the counties developed their own procedures for daily assessment of conditions, offshore, inshore, and onshore. By necessity, they had to make them up in order to wrap their arms around what was happening. For example, each morning, early in the morning, they'd go out to all of the areas, estimate debris volume, water color, respiratory irritation, and odor. But standardizing these subjective qualitative measures, even among different observers, was challenging, and it wasn't consistent across counties. So the data aren't really comparable. And because of the complexity of operations, there were different streams of data being reported to different managers in different formats. And overall, it seemed like most counties lacked a centralized open data reporting, management, and visualization tool to handle the whole operation. So we recommend developing regionally standardized procedures and training for open water and shoreline surveillance and assessment, especially for those qualitative indicators, and to develop a centralized open data management and visualization tools and training. Because in the midst of the crisis, those reporting tools should be simple and fast for staff to use consistently, and data summaries and visualizations should be easily accessible by leadership. And finally, cleanup. The existing equipment was simply insufficient for the magnitude of this event, for the magnitude of what had to be done. Counties lacked a variety of vessels needed for the inshore and offshore cleanup. And this may have resulted in cleanup efforts being focused mostly on the beaches, where cleanup activities already go on for beach rack, for example. All the red tide debris was disposed at landfills or incinerated, which may have been a missed opportunity to generate soil enriching compost. The efficacy of safely composting red tide debris is unknown currently, but Mote Marine Laboratory and Florida Gulf Coast University are currently studying the efficacy and the safety of composting red tide debris. So we recommend ensuring access to adequate and appropriate equipment for all the different areas and habitats. It should be sourced early and secured through purchase, lease, loan, subcontract, whatever means, so that counties can be responsive to all types of locations and conditions, including flat bottom skiffs, outrigger vessels, trash skimmers, beach rakes, wave runners and blowers, to get those fish out from underneath docks and mangrove forests, as well as turbidity barriers, soft-sided dumpster bags, and of course, PPE. With regard to disposal, we will recommend designated FDEP permitted composting sites. And there's a statute that governs what that means. That's of course pending the outcome of MOAT and FGCU's study on the efficacy of composting in order to get rid of the brevetoxin. So we took all this information and we organized it into red tide response operations plans, incorporating detailed steps for monitoring and reporting, for cleanup, for communications, and for records management. We also included a variety of resources that basically amount to a breadcrumb trail in the event that it's a long time before the plan is needed again. We hope it is, but it may not. And for each of the 5 coastal counties of Tampa and Sarasota Bays, we developed a plan with their particulars. And those plans can be further customized to their unique physical geography, their command structure, and their resources. So bottom line, we think it's all about targeting the floating debris. Red tide and dead marine life don't stop at the county line. It's a really challenging call of duty though, and it can be made easier and more effective, we think, with regional cooperation for sharing data, sharing surveillance, sharing equipment, and contractors. In the end, cooperation can lead to more capacity, that leads to more cleanup, leads to a healthier bay and a happier public. We'd like to sincerely thank all of the resource managers and emergency managers who shared their time and knowledge to make this study possible. We thank our funders as well, the Tampa Bay Environmental Restoration Fund and the Sunrise Rotary Club Foundation of Sarasota. You can download the Red Tide Impact and Response Summaries at this URL, scienceandenvironment.org/projects/red tide. I'll drop it in the chat box as well. And I'd be really happy to take any questions.
You need to unmute.
Jennifer, this is Randy Runnels with the Tampa Bay Aquatic Preserves. I'm sorry, I don't have my raise hand button. That's been a problem with me on Zoom lately. But anyway, I had a couple of questions. I've been very interested in recent years in research that's been done in closed vessel composting. And I think that it might, there might be some role for that in this, but it might be nice if there were some way to, I know the brevetoxin is concerned, but to create more of a network of closed vessel composting for, you know, marinas and local seafood industry and all that that's used routinely, and then maybe have that capacity, not in one central drop off, but, you know, scattered around the bay if the brevetoxin can be dealt with in those, but might be nice to have these low odor or odor-free almost closed vessel systems that might be not only developed to create fertilizer and all from day-to-day fish waste, but then have a little capacity built in there in a dispersed way to handle these events. I was wondering if anybody was looking into that.
Randy, that's a great idea. I'm not aware of it. The researcher at MOAT, Cindy Heil, is leading the project with Florida Gulf Coast University. I'll check in with her and find out. It occurs to me that Libby might be more aware of what's happening in the marinas if there are fish composting vessels that are being tested or distributed.
And I'll be meeting with Kevin Claridge and MOAT several meetings in the near future. I think I could ask him directly as well. I had one more minor question. It's kind of something I've been interested in, but it's not, it was a minor mention at the first of your presentation. You talked about the reduction in snapping shrimp sounds, and we've been interested in for a while in maybe using acoustic mapping of snapping shrimps to map the hard bottom that's so hard to, low profile hard bottom in Tampa Bay and all that. I was wondering if there's somebody you're aware of that's doing acoustic monitoring, something quantitative with snapping shrimp sounds, because that could be very interesting.
Absolutely. The acoustic network that I mentioned, PALS, Passive Acoustic Listening Station. It's a program that is a collaboration with primarily Randy Wells with the Sarasota Dolphin Research Project with the Chicago Zoological Society. He works out of offices at Mote Marine Laboratory. So there's a network of about 15 stations all around Sarasota Bay. They're looking to expand that network. And so I can put you in touch with Randy Wells, or he's pretty easy to find as well.
And they're not active right now with stations in Tampa Bay, though, I guess is the reason I
I see Maya has a hand up. I'm not sure. She might
They're
add
not on your recommendation, Randy. I actually talked with them a little bit about it, and they didn't kind of give me the answer that I was hoping for. So I think they would definitely benefit from some additional talking with you. But no, they're not monitoring in Tampa Bay right now. And they thought that the question was sort of interesting, but they thought that the sounds of snapping shrimp would be too ubiquitous to really be informative for locating hard bottom. I don't know that I agree with that. Like I said, I think that, it's probably worth a talk, but I did raise that idea with them. So they'd be primed to hear from you.
Yeah, I would probably disagree with that as well, because when I'm swimming in turbid water, like Cockroach Bay, sometimes you can't see your hand in front of your face. I know when I'm swimming over snapping shrimps, over hard bottom, because I can hear it, and I've ground truth that a number of times. And the nice thing about snapping shrimp, their frequency of their snaps is very well defined, and it's high enough that it doesn't travel very far, so you can pretty much pinpoint things with it. So we're definitely would like to work on that more in-house, since there aren't too many ways of sensing this low to zero relief hard bottom around Tampa Bay. But I'd like to do a little experiment with that sometime out in the field. Anyway, thanks.
Quick question, Jennifer. I think one of the major responsibilities of ABM is to encourage coordination. And I see from just the recommendations you've given that there's an opportunity for us to bring together these different entities and share the recommendations that you've had, and perhaps then identify a way to reach out to the policymakers as to policies that may need to be developed and implemented. Now, to whom have you shared your recommendations, and what has been your response?
This is the grand debut. You were the first.
Okay, well then I definitely hope, Lana, that you will set up some type of a response input situation where members of this group can formally send in their ideas or suggestions on this particular topic, because it's definitely economic and environmental issue that we have an opportunity to address in a significant way. I also will ask staff, and you particularly, Alana, to work with me in providing a summary of these presentations to present to the regional council, so that they can work with us on this.
Yeah, and I think that this is also a great topic to bring over to the Natural Resources Subcommittee,
Right.
and give them a good first thing to work on too.
Okay, are there any other questions?
Looks like Ed has his hand up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to concur with what you guys just expressed in terms of forwarding it to the committees, and just wanted to applaud Jennifer and crew for the work they did on this project. I think initially when we envisioned this, it was a quite different project, but I think the end result of them identifying gaps and key issues that the region can collaboratively work on is of prime importance. And there are things that we are going to probably tap Jennifer in presenting at our SRA program policy board. And there's certainly things that we would support funding, especially the open data and visualization tools that were recommended. And we can definitely support that and move those things along. But in terms of the countywide policies, I would love to hear any sort of comment from the county staff that are online, if they felt that any formal recommendations from this ABM to adopt some of the planning tools that Jennifer mentioned during her presentation would be a benefit to moving it along within their jurisdictional bodies.
Yes, Ed, and if we can actually make this a part of a gathering of the key policymakers to discuss and educate them and get feedback, that would be a more to implement what you're saying, an even more in-depth way of maybe getting some action. Because the other question that I have of Jennifer, and I guess others may have had it, you know, we can send rockets to Mars now, into the moon, and we can do all these wonderful things. Where are we in finding some scientific solutions to deal with the red tide? Not just cleaning up the debris and coordinating that, but actually getting rid of it. Is that possible?
Well, I would defer to experts on that question. I can say that there went recently a State of the Science Symposium on red tide, and a report was released with lots of really important insights as to what we know and what we don't know. Libby, if you have got that link handy, people might like to follow, and it's a short, 6 or 8 page report that really summarizes well where we are on, quote, solving red tide. I think where we're at now is really about mitigating and reducing the severity as opposed to eliminating.
But could you share that with Alana so that she can pass that on to the rest of this group? And I don't think this topic is dead by any means. Alana, is that something that you can maybe pass on to the subcommittee on natural resources to see if they have any additional ideas as to what we can do with it? Okay.
Let me take this opportunity to thank again all the folks that contributed, especially to Ed and Maya, who have supported this over what's been, gosh, 2 years now,
Right.
and really helped us kind of wrap our minds around what would be helpful and how to really contribute to the management issue surrounding red tide. So thanks again, Ed and Maya.
I know that the major initiative that Alana has taken on is to get this organization up and moving, and rather than just having presentations that are admirable and remarkable, to actually focus on the challenges that this agency was directed to deal with when it was developed. So I am very excited about it. I know all of you are, because each of you has so much to contribute. Alana, do we have anything? Because I know we have another presentation, but I don't want to defer any important questions somebody might want to raise at this point or direct to Jennifer. Does anyone else have something they'd like to add?
The chat has been pretty active. I know some people have asked some questions. Does anyone want to speak up and ask one of those? If not, then we'll move on to the next presentation with the remainder of our time. Okay, I think we should just move on to the next presentation.
Okay, we'll do that then. We have a presentation now on the conservation status of Diamondback turtles, terrapins in Tampa Bay, and I believe George, you're here. Are you going to present that to us? George Henry? George?
No, we can't hear you, George. I see him, and we can't hear you.
I see him, but he needs to turn on his sound.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you now, George.
Okay, thank you. So it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Alana, he needs to do some screen sharing here, and he's having an issue.
Yep, I made him co-host. He can present now.
Okay, George, it's okay.
Okay, are we on the screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I want to thank Alana and Maya for making it possible for me to be on the agenda this morning and to talk about an important imperiled turtle that lives along the coasts of the Atlantic and Gulf and occurs here in Tampa Bay. So Diamondback Terrapins are molluscivores and sexually dimorphic. The females are significantly larger than the male turtles. Florida's a significant state for turtle diversity. About 45% of all species that occur in the United States, which is the most turtle-rich country in the world, also occur here in Florida. So terrapins are the only turtle restricted to brackish water throughout the entire world and can be found in Florida's extensive estuarine and salt marsh and mangrove habitats. And as I said, they occur on the Atlantic and Gulf coast. So this gives you a distribution of what it looks like. You can see Florida's got a pretty extensive coastline. 7 recognized subspecies throughout their 16-state range, and they've also been documented about 10 or 12 years ago to be native to Bermuda based on fossil and genetic evidence. But these kind of maps are very misleading, and that it makes it appear as if it's continuous all the way around the 16 states. When you take away the rest of it, it becomes a little bit cleaner, and you can see this is strictly a coastal species, not up in freshwater, not out in salt water. But even then it's misleading because it's really more of a series of dots and dashes. It's gone in entire areas along our coastline, which I'll talk a little bit more about it. And understanding the geographic distribution of any species of plant or animal is critical to management and conservation efforts. So Florida is important for terrapins in particular because 20% of the entire range of the species is in Florida. 5 of the 7 recognized subspecies occur here, and 3 of them are endemic, including the ornate diamondback terrapin, which lives here in Tampa Bay. So Florida's terrapin populations and diverse coastal habitats are critical to the conservation of the species range wide. So if we just narrow in on Florida, this gives you a distribution for the 5 recognized subspecies, and D, which is the species we have here in Tampa Bay, you can see has a long distribution from the western panhandle of Florida all the way down to Everglades. So quite a long distribution, and you can see Tampa Bay is right there in the middle of it. So major threats to the species in Florida, at least, are listed on the screen. Loss of nesting habitat, which is a problem because of hardening of shoreline, decreases available habitat for them to get up on shore to nest. And also there's concerns regarding fragmentation of population. So as they're trapped out by crabbers or other threats impact local populations, you get these big gaps which occur in Florida, in particular along the southeastern coast near Fort Lauderdale, West Palm, and Miami. Predation of adults and nests is pretty significant. You can see a big female here that a raccoon got a hold of. They'll come up on the shore to nest. The raccoons will get them, rip into them, and pull out all the eggs and other organs they're going to be able to eat. So they're not quite smart enough to know that they're eating the goose that lays the golden egg, because it'll be back in 14 days to lay another clutch if it were to be able to survive. Rats on a number of our islands are causing problems with eggs and hatchlings as well. I want to talk more in detail about crab pot mortality and climate change. So mortality in crab pots is a huge threat range wide, only second to habitat loss. Here you can see a pot that's been pulled up with 2 dead adult terrapins in it. And this threat's been known now for close to 80 years. It's been in the literature. So this shouldn't be something that's just now popping on the radar screen. Here's a trap that's pulled up in Georgia with a pile of dead turtles. They can only stay underwater for so long, and once once the water, covers over the traps, then they're pretty much history. They can last for a couple hours maybe, but the tide's going to be up and they're going to end up drowning, unfortunately. So we did research, Joe Butler, my partner from University of North Florida, and I, on the impacts of bycatch reduction devices on crab pots, and found that we can reduce terrapin mortality by approximately 73%. So that protects a lot of the females, the most valuable member of the terrapin population. Males are still able to get in, but not the largest males. So this is an excluder device. So this is about 4.5 centimeters from top to bottom, and that's what keeps the terrapins out. So anything over 4.5 centimeters height is not going to be able to get into the trap. We measured thousands of crabs, and there was no statistically significant difference in sex, size, or number of the harvestable crabs that were captured. We tested this for 3 summers, 8 locations throughout the state, just to see if there was any variation from the Panhandle to the Florida Keys. Ghost pots, which are crab pots that are just out there on their own. They've fallen off of traps off of boats as they're being moved, or they've been washed away during hurricanes or other severe weather events. Here you can see the balls are inside the trap, so it's likely these were being moved, and they'll continue to self-bait as crabs and other things get into the trap, and then the terrapins will go in there, and then they begin to fall apart and other animals come in, and it's a never-ending cycle. So these abandoned crab trap pickups that FWC, and I know Tampa Bay Watch is involved with that, are very beneficial to reducing the numbers of ghost pots, as we call them, that are out there trapping Diamondback terrapins. So certainly a regulatory change that would require bycatch reduction devices on both recreational and crab pots would be the greatest conservation action that FWC could undertake, and they're working on that now. There's a draft rule that will be likely voted on in May, which will prohibit take. They're still collecting of terrapins. You're not allowed to have more than 2 in your possession. You can't take more than 1 a day. Problem is that poachers don't really care what the rules are, and they're out there pulling terrapins from South Florida, very highly desirable down in the Keys and Everglades area, getting $3,000 to $5,000 a piece for specimens that are shipped off to Asia or Europe, or even collectors here in the United States. So hopefully prohibiting take and further limiting possession of terrapins would be a good step forward, but requiring BRDs would be the most beneficial thing. So FWC, instead of going with recommendations in a legal petition from the Center for Biological Diversity and the Florida Turtle Conservation Trust and the Diamondback Terrapin Working Group, which was submitted to FWC in early 2020 and is currently going through commission meetings, they're proposing only 5 terrapin bycatch reduction zones. You can see one of those is in Tampa Bay. So here's a little bit closer. It's the entire bay, all the way up to Old Tampa Bay, Hillsborough Bay. So it's if this goes through, then any blue crab pots would be required to have a BRD of an unknown size. We recommended 4.5 by 12 centimeters because that's what we tested and found that we could prevent a majority of the terrapins from drowning. But it's likely that the openings will be slightly larger due to crabber pushback. So climate change is another issue of concern, and not one that's being talked about enough, but certainly being talked about by marine turtle, or sea turtles as some people call them, and Diamondback terrapin biologists, is loss of nesting habitat due to sea level rise. In addition, the impact on temperature-dependent sex determination is a concern. So some turtles have environmental sex determination, or TDSD. Some turtles have genetic sex determination. Terrapins is the temperature dependent. So rising temperatures in the nest would result in more females. Cooler temperatures would result in more males. So I guess if you're going to have more of one, I guess having more females than males is great, but nature already has it worked out for the ratio that's currently working under. So other threats of concern in Florida and in Tampa Bay are, I've already mentioned the illegal pet trade, but non-native species. So plant species, which can overgrow nesting areas and affect temperature-dependent sex determination as well by shading out nest sites. And species like feral hogs, which can disturb nesting areas, eat eggs and young. I don't think feral hogs is a huge problem in a good bit of Tampa Bay, but certainly in some areas and other areas of the state as well. Fire ants are known to attack hatching eggs and young and have been documented to be a threat to a lot of ground nesting species, including several species of turtles like gopher tortoises and diamondback terrapins. Boat strikes, injuries can reduce body condition and affect survivorship. 10 to 20% of terrapins have scars on them, depending where you are within their range, from encounters with boat props and just severe trauma from impact. And oil spills, I've seen photographs of terrapins from Tampa Bay and other parts of the country during past oil spills with terrapins covered, and that'll impact the food chain. They're molluscivores, eating dwarf surf clams and marsh periwinkles and small crabs. So certainly oil spills will impact the food chain and critical wetlands and nesting habitat as well. Road mortality, which is not a significant threat so much in Florida. There are areas where we've documented terrapins crossing roadways to get to nesting sites and getting hit. But this is a huge threat in some states like New Jersey, South Carolina, and Georgia. So there's a number of research needs, and this is coming back around always to distributional surveys and getting a better idea about population sizes, genetic work. There's now long-term population studies ongoing, but only a couple long-term studies in Florida. And we need more work on the impacts of predation and ghost pots in particular. So Butler and myself, we've done work up in the Big Bend region, spent 3 summers surveying up in the area indicated on the map. And we're able to produce maps showing where these animals lived, which is beneficial to management and conservation efforts. We're trying to get Diamondback terrapins on the radar screen of coastal managers. I mean, FWC in the last year, I guess as a result of the legal petition, have started to address some concerns, but we'd like to see coastal habitat managers, including Diamondback terrapins, and their management plans as well. Currently, a couple of university professors and myself are working on seeking funding to initiate a Diamondback terrapin survey in Tampa Bay, which would go from the Pasco, Pinellas County line out on the Gulf down all through the 3 counties in the Bay, and then back out to the section of Manatee County that is also on the Gulf Coast, so that we can get an idea of their distribution and where they may be encountering blue crab pots. We're also desirous to find out where their nesting sites are. There's not a lot of information regarding nesting sites other than some spots out on Tarpon Key, one little area, and a couple other small sites in the northern part of the bay. So we're also hoping to look at exactly where they are nesting and in regards to GPS points, and installing data loggers, little eye buttons, which will give us nest temperature profiles, and then go ahead and plot that out against 20, 30, 40-year predictions for sea level rise and how much habitat will be left for Diamondback terrapins to nest in the Tampa Bay region. We've initiated a Diamondback terrapin working group about 15, 16 years ago, I guess, at this point now. And terrapin biologists all up and down the coast are working together to try to address these problems so that we don't end up having to federally list this iconic coastal species. I guess about 10 years or so ago, the Florida Turtle Conservation Trust was fortunate to receive a mini grant from the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, where we developed educators' guides and put together some workshops for educators and held workshops for crabbers who were very resistant to bycatch reduction devices. We had no attendees at any of the 3 crabbers workshops, but the educators' workshops, as well as a symposium for environmental professionals, were standing room only. And then a number of us have worked together to provide a reference material in the form of an edited volume on ecology and conservation needs of Diamondback Terrapins, where coastal managers can get this information on how to best address conservation concerns of terrapins, either for aquatic habitat or nesting terrestrial habitat in their respective management areas. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. I really appreciate the opportunity to try to increase attention on this ecologically significant coastal species. And I was told I should make sure I have time for questions and answers. And let's move to that now, I guess.
Okay, let's have some questions of George at this time. I wonder, hearing all your discussion about some of the threats to the species, have you and your organization been able to sort out the types of initiatives that could be taken by the local governments, regional governments, state agencies, and so on? Have you been able to coordinate that so we could focus on what areas should be addressed?
Well, regarding state agencies, the Center for Biological Diversity, Elise Bennett in particular, has been working with different agencies along the distribution of terrapins, not just in about possession of terrapins, as well as getting BRD regulations so that we could try to prevent drowning in crab pots. We've also been working with different land managers and bay managers, particularly in the northern states. Chesapeake Bay is one in particular, to address bay-related issues, habitat protection, and problems with invasive species taking over these nesting areas and shading out nest sites. And we've also worked to coordinate efforts with transportation departments, because in a number of areas like South Carolina, New Jersey, Georgia in particular, where terrapins are getting up on causeways as they exit the water, the females to go to nest and end up getting hit by cars. So signage goes in and so on. But what we really need is to identify their true distribution in some areas. And in Florida in particular, we have no idea about their distribution in Tampa Bay. The only work done on Diamondback Terrapins in our bay was work that Butler and I did back in 2003, testing bycatch BRDs, bycatch reduction devices, out at Alafaya Bank and down in Terracea Bay.
Would state agencies be able to initiate regulations that would be helpful, or is it going to take state or federal legislation? It sounds to me like both, but I don't know.
Well, we don't have the support for or evidence that they need to be federally listed, but certainly in some states they should be listed. They're only considered an imperiled species. In Florida, FWC has indicated they may be considering state listing certain populations, certain subspecies, but obviously we're hoping for protection for the species range wide. And of course, it's up to the state wildlife agency whether or not bycatch reduction devices will be required on crab pots used in Florida waters. So that's the biggest push right at present. And it's to try to get as much conservation benefit out of bycatch reduction devices on crab pots, hopefully not just the 5 terrapin bycatch reduction zones that they're proposing, but statewide. and then also to try to get a better understanding on their distribution. There's sections of the state where there's been no survey work at all. And then there's other sections like the work we did in Big Bend, where we've spent 3 summers out there mapping out where they're nesting and where they live. But as I said, we don't really have much information on this, as I said, ecologically significant species that help to control marsh periwinkle populations. And of course, they're an important food resource in the form of eggs for a lot of other wildlife.
Okay. Do
It
we
looks
have
like
any?
Randy, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if there's some more questions here, because it seems to me that this is a topic that could be discussed in both of the subcommittees, Alana, as to
Randy Reynolds has a question.
Yeah, Randy.
I have a couple of questions about, as far as detecting where these are. Environmental DNA has become very important in some of these species that may be hard to, to establish presence of. And I was wondering if the genome of, or the environmental DNA necessary to add to the library of those people who do that sort of sampling is there, if they're using environmental DNA. And the other thing that crossed my mind is there's around the state a number of efforts to monitor horseshoe crabs, and it seems like people doing that, if properly educated about what to look for, might be able to look for burrows and the presence of the terrapins themselves.
Yeah, Randy, good to see you. It's been a number of years. To my knowledge, there's been no eDNA work done with terrapins in regards to trying to develop a detection technique. It's been done with a number now of riverine turtles and freshwater aquatic turtles, but it's certainly a topic that a number of terrapin researchers have been discussing. But we're not there yet for terrapins. We're barely there for some other freshwater turtle species. The survey techniques that work best are just coastal surveys, doing head counts. So you enter into a creek and count all of the heads of terrapins as you're going up. You can see this thumb-sized head sticking up, and often tell if it's an adult female or either a male or a immature female. And of course, you only count them going up, but not going back down, or you're going to be counting the same animals. You survey all of the land looking for rated nests, as well as skeletal material and remains, carcasses, and so on. We've done crab pots, use modified crab pots that we make 6 feet tall and test those. But when you're doing these surveys of large areas, you can't really put out pots and continue to go back. So the best technique that works is surveying slowly by boat, and also searching land for rated nests and so on. Raccoons, as much as turtle biologists detest them, these subsidized predators, are very beneficial to turtle surveys, because they dig up these nests and they leave these eggs on the ground for us and lead us right to where the nesting occurs. So if you have evidence on an island of raccoons living there, and you're seeing the appropriate prey items for terrapins in the water, and you're not finding any rated nests, then terrapins are not using that island as a nesting site. So that's pretty much the way we do it.
Okay, do we have any other questions that you'd like to direct to our speaker?
Looks like Ed had a hand up.
Ed Sherwood?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment to George. Have you looked at mining any of the fisheries independent monitoring data? I know they've been starting to collect information on terrapin catches in their seine netting efforts, but I don't know how prolific that would be in terms of capturing the diversity and distribution of them.
We have been doing some of that. Butler and I have tried to compile as many records as we can from different monitoring groups and FWC's trawling studies and so on. So we've been able to add a number of dots to the map as a result of that. in
Great.
different areas of the state.
Good. Any other questions? Well, Dr. Heinrich, thank you so much for your presentation. Keep in touch with us. Keep us apprised of your efforts. I know this is something we're going to keep on the front burner to see if there's anything that we can do to be supportive of you.
Thank you. No doctor in front of my name, but thank you for the compliment. And I really appreciate the opportunity to try to inform people about what's happening to a species that's cryptic and most people aren't even aware occurs here. So
Well,
thanks again.
We'll be discussing it, and Alana, the presentation he's made will also be available to everyone, will it not?
Yep, both presentations are already posted on our website on ABM, which I showed in the beginning of my presentation, how to navigate to the agendas. The summary will be posted there, and then both presentations. And I think George's presentation, I think that this issue can be also carried over, like you said earlier, Madam Chair, to the subcommittee, the natural resources one, to maybe we can make some more formal recommendations to the cities and counties surrounding the Tampa Bay.
Okay, thank you so much. We'll move on to the few remaining things on our agenda. First of all, it's important that we get from any of you or all of you whatever suggestions or ideas that you have as to important priorities to you in your organization, either for discussion in future meetings, but also for publication in our Bay soundings, because we've got some really great ideas coming out of that, and we'd like to follow up with you. So please follow up with Alana and let her know of some ideas that are important to you. Also want to call to your attention that our next meeting date of the full agency will be on June the 10th. Others for the rest of the year will be September 3rd and December 9th. Is there anything else to come before us at this time? If not, thank you, Alana. Thank you to each of our presenters. And most importantly, thank you very much for joining us today. We look forward to working with you. We'll see you in June. Meeting adjourned.